How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good buddy out there on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing, man?
Doing well, Jack. So stoked to be back with football season having started with college and pro ball starting. And it feels like, man, just like that early morning slate on Sunday feels like it hit like just right into my veins, man. It feels like you can just pump me full of it and to be able to just sit down and watch one game and another and another. And you got red zone on another screen and you're trying to figure out how your fantasy teams are doing and your picks and stuff. And you can just inject that straight into my veins. I am completely fine knowing I'm going to sit down like a lump on a log watching a heck of a lot of football on Sundays. And that's what happened. So we're happy to be back at it. How are you doing, Jack?
No, man, it is great having football around. I pretty much all day Saturday and then most of the afternoon on Sunday I just spent sitting on my couch holding my 3-week-old daughter watching football, and it was perfect. It couldn't have gotten better than that. So it is good for the football season to be back, for fall to be here. We had week 1 of the NFL season start last Thursday night with quite the game between Kansas City and Baltimore. Had a good game then Friday also from Sao Paulo between Philadelphia and Green Bay. And then Sunday, man, it came and it was glorious. So I think we could take 2 hours just talking about how great it was to watch football and the stuff that we liked, analyzing every single game. But I feel like the best way that we can kind of rein things in and move through this in a timely manner is just kind of going through some winners and losers. So Nick, let's just go through. We'll go back to back. I know that we each have 3 winners and 3 losers, and so we'll start with the winners. And Nick, I'll let you go first. We haven't gone over our winners and losers with each other, so this will actually be pretty interesting. See if we have some overlap, which maybe we will, maybe we won't. And yeah, so Nick, why don't you start us off with your first winner of the week?
Mm-hmm. So first winner of the week was a game that I was drawn into watching, was the Cowboys and Browns game. And that game I was just drawn into because it was headlined as the first Tom Brady game, the first game that he was going to be announcing. So that's one that I made sure to flip to, and I was like, okay, I'm on top of it. And I was tuned in. One of the reasons I was tuned in was to watch this player, my first winner, being Micah Parsons, who absolutely ate the Browns alive. Mm-hmm. They had both of their starting offensive tackles out that game, and Micah Parsons moving around, being that chess piece, he just absolutely dominated. He forced so many pressures on Deshaun Watson, who Deshaun Watson did not look great in that game, but Micah Parsons looked every bit on the defensive player of the year level that many people are thinking that he's going to reach this year. And so Micah Parsons being one of the many edge rushers this week, who I think deserved to get that gold medal winner of the week. I think he's one of them that checked the box and really lit up the scoreboards in a really good way this week. So my first winner will be Micah Parsons.
Yeah, Micah, and I mean, honestly, the whole Cowboys squad looked really, really good. I mean, there were a lot of question marks about, like, they haven't really done much to improve the team in the offseason. Jerry Jones always says, that he's competing and always competing for that Super Bowl, but it was like, what have you done in the offseason to show that you actually feel that way? And you know what? The team went out there and they beat what I thought was going to be a really, really good Cleveland Browns team. Now, there are some questions to be had about quarterback play in Cleveland, and, maybe, I don't know, that they would be better if Jameis Winston was their starting quarterback moving forward. But yeah, no, Micah Parsons, regardless, yes, there are caveats. Yes, the Browns were without both of their starting tackles. Yes, Deshaun Watson is honestly like in the bottom 3 starting quarterbacks in the NFL after this week. I mean, it was bad. It was that bad. But still, he lined up and he did what he was supposed to do against inferior opponents. So yeah, I definitely hear that. My first winner of the week is, Nick, your Pittsburgh Steelers, because you know what? They won without good offense. They had decent offense. They had winning offense, but it wasn't good. I would say I would call it average offensive play. Justin Fields did what he had to do. He didn't turn the ball over, which was his biggest detriment in Chicago, and so that was definitely a plus sign if you're a Steelers fan looking at this squad. But they didn't score any touchdowns. They got into the red zone once, maybe twice. I know there was one fourth
Three
down.
times, I believe. There
Yeah,
were about 3 times.
there was a fourth down that they went for that they didn't convert.
Correct.
So they could have won 21-10, and you think, oh, they scored 3 touchdowns. When in reality, it would have been an epic game from Chris Boswell. But still, they won with an average offense, and I do think that they have the ability to have above average offense. And so I think the Steelers are winners because one, they won. Two, they won on the backs of their defense and their kicker. And Justin Fields showed that, like, hey, you know what? He might be able to get this team moving in the right direction. The offensive line looked a lot better than it has recently for Pittsburgh. There was some questionable, to say the least, officiating in that game. I didn't see all of it, but the one that I did see was the personal foul. No, the personal foul against
Broderick Jones. Yes, number 7.
That was just like, that was terrible. But despite all that, being on the road and it feeling like a home team for the Steelers, Steelers showed up in Atlanta. And so for that, the Steelers have to be a winner of this week and a winner in my book, especially when you had every other team in the AFC North lose a game. And already like that after week 1, the Steelers have a 1-game advantage on everybody. I was high on the Steelers as a playoff team coming into the preseason, and I definitely still feel that way. So definitely winner for me are the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I appreciate all the kind words, Jack, for my football team. The Steelers definitely were impressive as an overall football team. But as you were saying, Jack, the officiating was awful. There was a bad pass interference call on offense on George Pickens, where they called him for a push-off that was minimal. It looked like this in real time in slow-mo. It was minimal. And on top of that, there was the personal foul call, as well as an offsides call on TJ Watt that he wasn't offsides. TJ Watt's stat line this game, if all of the flags had been proper and if you had actually gotten good officiating, would have been a 3-sack performance with 2 strip sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries, as well as a tackle for loss on Bijan. Just ridiculous. TJ Watt was insane in this game. And Caleb McGarry, the right tackle, who's not a bad right tackle, who was a first-round pick, just got his lunch money stolen from him by TJ Watt. And as you were saying, Chris Boswell, 3 50-plus yard field goals, including a 56 and a 57-yard one. Just absurd by Chris Boswell. And on top of that, you may not have known it, the Steelers punter got injured with a season-ending knee injury late in the game, and Chris Boswell had to punt and had to deal with a backup holder, too, for his last field goal. And so Chris Boswell did a little bit of everything, had to really bail the Steelers out in a way in this game. But, man, he was very impressive, as you were saying.
And another bad call by the officials, not calling at least a running into the kicker. I don't think it would have constituted roughing because it was the kick leg, not the plant leg. But still, they threw the flag. We're all like, I think it was like a 4th and 4 or something too. So it was like, oh, good, they'll get the automatic first down regardless. Steelers will get to keep moving down the field. And instead, they called a holding by the punting team. It was atrocious. So, but
it was bad.
The Steelers are victorious anyway. Nick, who is your second winner of the week?
My second winner of the week would happen to be, these 2 guys I smushed into one winner because they're winners, in my opinion, for the same reason. And they're both guys who didn't play great this week, but who I consider winners. And that will be Justin Herbert and Caleb Williams, because these dudes I consider to be super duper stars who are on either an insane trajectory or who are a top 6 quarterback in Justin Herbert. And I think that both of these dudes, to be able to breathe out and win a game as a superstar quarterback without playing well whatsoever on either of these guys' parts. Justin Herbert has never won a game before throwing for the number of yards he did before or lower. He threw for, I believe, 150 something yards, and he won the game pretty reasonably against the Raiders. And that was because of good defense and a good run game. And J.K. Dobbins really like resurrecting his career after 2 straight years, I believe, of season-ending injuries.
Yeah.
And really to be able to be Justin Herbert and be like, wow, I've had to put a Superman cape on the last couple of years to win games, and really be able to breathe out and say, okay, maybe I don't have to be the be all end all for this team. And he still played well. But same thing for Caleb Williams, where I don't believe there were any offensive touchdowns by the Bears in that game. And they won the game. They won the game with 28 points, I believe, which is absurd for the Bears, with an interception by Will Levis late in the game, as well as a punt block, I believe. But man, to be able to be a quarterback like a Caleb Williams or a Justin Herbert, who many people believe are going to be up here, and to be able to win games not playing well is a great sign for them. And I consider they should be really happy and sleep really well at night, knowing that they have that support system now that they had.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely thought about Caleb Williams and the Bears. And it's really we talked about it briefly. It's really do you look at the glass as half full or as half empty? And you said it great in a way of looking at the glass as half full. When the glass is half empty, Caleb Williams didn't look like he was average. He looked bad. He only threw for 93 yards. The Bears offense didn't get into the end zone, despite all of the weapons that he has around them. And
he did get a 2-point conversion, so somewhat in the end zone.
Did get a 2-point conversion. So I think with one game like this, you should look at it as glasses half full. But I mean, Chicago plays. Who do they play next? They play Houston and then Indianapolis and then the Rams. And that's not going to be that's not going to be an easy stretch. And so you might need to start being a little concerned if you have some similar performances over the next few games for Caleb Williams. But I definitely agree with your insight there on the way it played out, and especially Justin Herbert also. And how about, huge shout out to J.K. Dobbins for what he's done after those injuries. And also, I mean, I always thought that, Austin Eckler was a very underrated running back for them because of his ability to catch the ball out of the outfield. He was a good pass protection back as well. And so I thought there was going to be significant drop-off for that team by letting him go. And again, it was one game, and this is the time for overreactions, but still, what I saw from J.K. Dobbins seems like he's going to step in there pretty well. And Herbert already has trust with him, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
So my next winner, speaking of the AFC West, is Derek Carr. Now, I say speaking of the AFC West because he came from the Raiders. Derek Carr got traded from the Raiders. Devontae Adams was really ticked off about it because that was the only reason he wanted to go to the Raiders, so he could play with him again. Derek Carr goes to the Saints, and Derek Carr looked bad last year. He did not look good last year. It was not pretty. It was seeming like, oh, shoot, the Raiders made the right call. Derek Carr is falling off the deep end. This is not good. But, man, what he did on Sunday, I mean, he truly reestablished himself as a above-average quarterback in the NFL. Again, 1 week. This is the time for overreactions after one game. It was against the Panthers. But seriously, he completed 82% of his passes, threw for 200 yards, which doesn't seem like much, but also only 2 quarterbacks in the NFL this week passed for over 300 yards. It's like the lowest we've seen in, I forget how many years. They were talking about it, though, on Monday Night Football last night. But he also threw for 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And also, he just showed that he had that swagger. There was the J.C. Horn was trying to talk trash, and he said, I've thrown 3 touchdowns on you already. I mean, just baller, put J.C. Horn in his place. But yeah, he had a quarterback rating of 142.5 this last week. It was just, all in all, it was really, really good to see Derek Carr play that well. Good to see, what he is capable of, what he was capable of. I mean, I remember the one like crazy game, the crazy Amari Cooper Monday Night Football game, that he had like 4 touchdowns for like over 200 yards, when he was at the Raiders, and that was with Derek Carr as his quarterback, and they beat the Chiefs on Monday Night Football. Like Derek Carr has been a guy that he has the abilities. He's just been playing for the Raiders, right? And so I think we were all hoping to see this out of him last year when he first came to New Orleans, and it was really, really concerning that we didn't. But if this is sort of the norm for him here in New Orleans, then he makes New Orleans a much better team than I think we all thought they were going to be. The Spencer Rattler rumors, after that game, I don't think anyone's talking about how Spencer Rattler needs to take over right now. Granted, he might play bad next week and it'll all come back, but he's at least put those rumors to bed for now. And with that, getting that confidence for himself, but also giving the fans and the coaching staff confidence in him as well as his weapons. I just thought it was a really, really great week for Derek Carr.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely get behind that. Derek Carr, I believe they almost dropped a 50 burger on the Panthers. 47. Yeah. It should have been 50. They were taking their foot off the gas late. But man, yeah, the Panthers, man, I've seen some stuff online and it's like, are they going to earn the number 1 overall pick again? Maybe they're going to be able to use it this year, but man, they're looking like they might earn it this year. I was going back and forth a little bit about my third winner, and man, sticking with the quarterbacks, we're talking about the quarterbacks a lot. And I'm actually thinking about 2 guys from the same draft class. I'll just kind of go with one of them. But Baker Mayfield, who's the swaggy white dude who dropped 4 touchdowns this last weekend with Tampa Bay. Man, Baker Mayfield was surgical, had his just groove going, and man, there's not a lot else that you can say about Baker. He's just a really good player who really, I think, kind of fell out of the public eye for a stretch when he was on the Panthers, a little bit when he was on the Rams. And something that I was just thinking about, that I've been kind of rolling out this take a little bit, thinking about it. But Baker Mayfield last year, he beat the Eagles, who were one of the biggest dumpster fires basically late in the year that they fell apart. And that's who he beat in the playoffs. And the only other playoff game that he ever won in 2020 was against the Steelers, who were a late season blow up dumpster fire that season where injuries caught up to them and they were overrated. And so my mind is just going to like, Baker's really, really, I think, good. And the people who think like, oh, he's top 10, I think that might be a little bit of an overreaction, but I really love Baker. And he's really feasted in the playoffs against some disaster scenarios. But I think that when you put him in a good situation with these great receiving cores and weapons, and he's just really able to let his personality fly. Mm-hmm. It felt like the loss of Dave Canales really didn't mean much for them. And he really did a great job in his first game without that offensive coordinator that left to be a head coach. So, yeah, really, he did a great job.
Yeah, he completed 80% of his passes, threw for 289 yards, which I'm pretty sure was third. He's third in the league right now in passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and a rating of 146.4. I mean, you said surgical, and I that's exactly right. He just looked like he just had so much confidence. He looked like he's finally in a system that is good for him, 2, a coach that is good for him, and 3, a team that has confidence in him. Like the fall off for him in Cleveland, which there was a fall off, was really, really startling. So, maybe not many of our viewers know, but I was a Browns fan before becoming a Lions fan. They made the trade for Deshaun Watson, and I left for some, obviously just ethical issues that I had with that. But the thing was, like, in that year that you're talking about, that he won that playoff game against Pittsburgh, and that he honestly almost won the game against Kansas City that year too.
Mhm.
I think you had the fumble out of the end zone by Rashard Higgins, which should have been a targeting because it was a crown of helmet to the helmet hit that instead was a touchback, and they reviewed it. Can't review the targeting, but can review the fumble out of the end zone. And then also you had the Chad Henne having his little scramble on 3rd and 14 for 13 yards, which was just crazy. Like I think everyone thought, if the Browns stop the Chiefs here and they get the ball back, Baker's taking them down the field, there would have escaped. He was oozing with confidence at that point. But yeah, the fall off was crazy. He had an injury, and everyone was like, "No, that doesn't matter," which it did. He had a torn labrum. It wasn't in his throwing shoulder, but for anyone that knows good throwing mechanics as a quarterback, you use both shoulders. You're turning through and pulling through with one as you drive through with the other, and it certainly affected him. So I'm really happy to see him with confidence, and I think, yeah, you're absolutely right that he's a winner for this week. My last winner is the Minnesota Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
They looked good. They looked good. They made the Giants look really bad, which I do think the Giants are really bad.
Yeah.
But there were other teams that are really bad that looked really good on Sunday because their opponent, who is really good, made them look really good. And the Vikings didn't do that. Sam Darnold looked like a legitimate quarterback in the NFL. I can really see Sam Darnold having like a Geno Smith type career arc where things just start. They started in New York and they didn't work out well, and bounce around as a backup to a few different places, and finally you get into a place that you have a good situation and you're able to make things work. I think we all kind of thought when JJ McCarthy went down that this team just wasn't really gonna have an impact on the season this year. But Darnold looks like a wild card bid for this Vikings team as possible. He definitely looked like a guy that is resurrecting his career and maybe getting whether it's from Minnesota or not a contract with a team somewhere. To be like, no, you're going to be our quarterback over these next few years, which is really good for him. And really good for the Vikings, that they are still able to compete or will be able to compete this year, despite having to take the setback of losing JJ McCarthy for the season. So the Vikings are my last winner. Obviously, there were a ton of winners this week, much more that we could have tapped into. But now it's time to move on to the losers. These teams or these players, whoever it is, was not their week. Maybe it was high expectations that they fell short of, or just something happened that was, just that's tough. That's going to be hard for them. So Nick, who's your first on your list of your losers for week 1 of the NFL season?
Oh my goodness. If you want to talk about a loser, I have one loser in mind who really embodies the word, and that will be David Tepper with the Panthers. He's the owner of the Panthers, and he has been the mastermind behind the operation that's gotten them this far, and really you can see the impact of his contributions on this team.
Oh,
The
God.
Panthers obviously have been a disaster. And their defense, which was kind of their calling card the last couple of years with their offense struggling, was atrocious, letting up 47 points to the Saints and Derek Carr, as you were saying before. Derek Carr obviously did a great job. But Bryce Young in this offense, that they reinforced the trenches with Robert Hunt. They have solid tackles, I would say, with the Kemakwanu and Taylor Moton. And Bryce Young, a number 1 overall pick with solid receivers with Deontay Johnson added, as well as the second round pick they added, top of the second round.
Xavier Legette.
Yes, Legette out of South Carolina. Yeah.
And Adam Thielen. Thielen's on that team.
And Adam Thielen. Yep. Old man Adam Thielen with 1,000 yards last year. But with that receiving core that, like, are they old? Do they have their warts and stuff? Yeah. But really on this team that the offense should have been improved and the defense was already solid, just looked like a disaster. Their offense couldn't do anything. Bryce Young couldn't do anything. He looked inaccurate. He looked Like he was just running around like a chicken with his head cut off, and not like one of those quarterbacks that can do something running around like that. He never really made game-changing plays on the move. He doesn't have the arm to be able to change the game with a deep throw like that. And Derek Brown, their stud defensive tackle, is injured and going on the IR, so at least 4 weeks. I believe it's probably season ending. But with that, the Panthers look like they're probably going to deserve to get this number 1 overall pick this year that they failed to get last year after trading it to the Bears when they got Bryce Young. But man, David Tepper, if you want to talk about a loser, he's the top guy on my list.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think that Bryce Young, there's a chance that he goes down as the biggest bust in NFL history. It is early. I don't want to put this kid in the grave immediately, but like, dude, it is not good. There's been a lot of chat lately, especially after his performance in the preseason, that like it's not talked about enough how big of a bust Trey Lance is, and that's completely right. But when Bryce Young is looking the way he is, it's really easy for Trey Lance to sort of just fade into the shadows and not get talked about, because Bryce Young looked terrible. I mean, just terrible. It wasn't even like, Rodgers had an interception last night that a ball was tipped and then a great play was made by another defender that, picked it off, and technically it's an interception, right? Bryce Young's interceptions aren't like that. It is, I'm throwing into triple coverage and I'm underthrowing my receiver, and the DB is just standing there with his hands like this waiting for the ball. Yeah, the Panthers are truly a dumpster fire. I mean, they fired Frank Reich last year, made him the scapegoat for really what wasn't his fault. It came out later he wanted to take Stroud, but everyone else was like, no, we're taking Bryce Young. And then it was Reich's fault that Bryce Young sucked. It was just all bad, all bad. My first loser is the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals start their season at home hosting the Gerard Mayo New England Patriots, with Jacoby Brissett going full circle, starting his career in New England, becoming the starter 10 years later or not in Cleveland, in New England, full circle, becoming the starter again 10 years later, while Drake May is sort of learning the ropes. You look at this Patriots team and you're like, who do they even have to catch the ball? They cut Juju Smith-Schuster, so it's like, who do they have to catch the ball? And this team goes into Cincinnati and beats the Bengals. And Nick, you and I were both high on the Bengals early on, or in this preseason. I'm not giving up hope on them yet, because for whatever reason, it just seems like the NFL season starts and Joe Burrow isn't quite ready, and it takes him 3 or 4 weeks to get ready to go. I mean, we both thought that wasn't going to be the case this year, because that had been happening on seasons that he was coming off an injury, either in the previous season or like in the off season. It was the thumb last year. It was the calf the year before. It was the torn ACL or messed up ACL. Like,
also had appendicitis one year, had to get his appendix removed during training camp.
Yeah. So like there are all these things, and it was like, it takes him a couple of weeks, but then he gets going. He had, as far as we know, a completely healthy training camp and off season, and still came in and this team looked like this. And so I think it's just the Bengals being the Bengals. But I mean, in as tough as a division as we're thinking the AFC North is going to be, it's not the Browns losing to the Cowboys, who were a playoff team last year. This is a team that we're thinking is competing for a top 3 pick in the draft this next year, and you just crapped the bed. Also, L on the all orange uniforms. I don't like them. I think maybe if they went, I think maybe if they went with black pants, then like maybe it would work. But the all orange just did not look good. I'm a Syracuse fan, and I don't think all orange uniforms look good. I hate when Syracuse wears their orange helmet, pants, and jersey. So just all orange in general is not a good look. And it wasn't a great debut for them, as they lost to the Patriots yesterday, which was just, or 2 days ago, as of us recording this, which was just mind-boggling to me.
How do you view the lack of T. Higgins being healthy for that game? Do you think that him playing would impact the outcome of this game? Or do you think that really it didn't matter that much, would you say?
I think that that is an excuse that you could make. But the fact is, you look at this Bengals team, and literally every single position on this roster, they should be better than the New England Patriots. Maybe not every position, but okay, yeah. Instead of Joe Burrow
Christian Gonzalez at corner might be better than the Bengals, but everything else I agree with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you look at this team and it's like, okay, in the past, Joe Burrow has basically had 3 wide receiver ones in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. Yes, there's gonna be new stuff to figure out with that. But you know what? The Patriots only scored 16 points. It's not like they showed up and they were an offensive juggernaut and you lost 28-34. You only scored 10 points. Joe Burrow has had, and deservedly so, had such high praises, said about him. And like I said, he deserves them. He is that dude. But man, they just need to figure out what it is about the first quarter of the season that it's like, why does he play like a bottom third quarterback in the NFL, and why does it take him so long to get him going? Maybe the Bengals need to stop being afraid of him being hurt and have him play all 3 preseason games. Maybe then he'll be ramped up enough that when the first game of the season comes, things will be fine. But this, I'm not making excuses for this. This game, they just looked too bad on offense. Defense looked great. They held him to 16 points, 13 or 16 points. But if you are one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL, like Joe Burrow is, we are raking Deshaun Watson across the coals for good reason. Right. We can't be holding Joe Burrow to a different standard when it comes to on the field play. That is than Deshaun Watson after this week.
Got another lawsuit lodged against him, or allegation just recently,
which could void his contract moving forward, and the Browns could be able to get out of it. So that's just a whole mess, and it's always going to be a mess. But
I will say for the Bengals, though, they had a really tough situation in this specific game where Mike Gesicki caught a seemingly scoring play in a touchdown on the 15-yard line, or off the 15-yard line. And it was overturned, actually, that it was ruled a touchdown and overturned as a no catch, basically, because he kind of didn't have control of the ball going out of bounds. But the very next play, Tanner Hudson fumbles the ball at the tight end, and the Patriots recover it. And that's at least a 3-point swing, if not a 7-point swing, if you're considering the touchdown. And the Patriots drive down the field and get a field goal. So that's kind of a turning point in the game, although clearly the Bengals are not an early season quality team in any year, let alone this one. But man, that's just a tough situation when you have guaranteed points, it seems like, that turn into a big 0. That's really tough for a team.
Yep.
Yes.
Nick, who's your next loser?
Oh, man. It seems like the poster boy for losers this last weekend, and somebody who I was high on, who I was talking with you about last week, Will Levis, who I like. Man, he had a play where the interception that he threw, that I don't even consider an interception. I consider it a gaffe among gaffes, where he's going down for a sack and he just flips the ball out with his hand, just a flip. And it turns into a pick 6, man, after a punt block, 16-point swing just like that. And Will Levis, the picture of him as the camera scrolling, just the hands on the head, on his knees, throwing the game away as literally as you can. Will Levis, with the team that clearly, with Bill Callahan and Brian Callahan doing offensive things, the run game did a good job. And with their addition of Tony Pollard, their run game looked solid.
Mm-hmm.
And still, Will Levis, with these improved weapons, with this improved run game, with the improved offensive line, still really his decision-making, that moment why do you do that? Why
It's
can you
tough.
not see it? Can you not put together the pieces to not make that decision? And that was really the quintessential losing play of the weekend for me. That if you can look at one play that lost a team a game, that's the losing play. That's one dude making a play that caused the L. And that was Will Levis this weekend.
Yep. Yeah, that was tough. I mean, I think you can look at it and see that he's trying to, get a ball to the sideline, get it out of bounds, let it be an incompletion. But, if you're not able to like throw it as hard as you can over into the stands, you just got to hold on to it. And he's young; he'll learn. I don't think I don't look at a play like that and think that makes Will Levis a terrible player. I think that was just a terrible decision. And
Right.
so, hopefully he's able to learn from it. The Titans are hosting the Jets this week, which is a great segue into my next loser, which is
Ooh.
teams who play in the Big Apple, the New York Giants and the New York Jets. It was not a good week if you are in the tri-state area. If you're a fan of a team in the tri-state area, the Giants, they just looked so pitiful, man. Like, I think for as bad as Carolina was, the Giants might be worse. Like, it's really that bad. Daniel Jones, since signing his 4-year, $160 million extension, has thrown more pick sixes than touchdowns. Granted, he was hurt
Oh,
for a lot of last year. He has thrown 3 pick sixes since signing that deal and has thrown 2 passing touchdowns since signing that deal, which is just the craziest statistic you will ever hear. The craziest statistic you will ever hear. But it looked so bad. On top of that, bad, even worse for the Giants was watching Saquon Barkley blossom in Brazil with the Eagles, scoring
3
3
touchdowns.
touchdowns. Man,
Yep.
like, if you are a Giants fan, you're just like, oh, it's rough. It is rough to be a Giants fan right now. It's rough to be Malik Neighbors right now because Daniel Jones is your quarterback. It is bad news. And then you look at the Jets, and there was all of this hype around them. And man, I was saying, you know what? I think if Rodgers is healthy, they are like a 9-8 squad. But for me to believe it against a good team, not like, I mean, a good team, like a great team, like, I have to see it first. And you know what I saw last night? I saw this revamped offensive line that is supposed to have fixed all of its issues just get absolutely bodied by the San Francisco 49ers front seven. I saw this defense that was supposed to be the thing that the Jets are actually going to be winning games on, and Aaron doesn't need to do too much, get absolutely torched by an undrafted free agent in Jordan Mason, which, by the way, it would have been awesome. Nick, I know you said you couldn't watch the game. I swear every single touch that this kid got, all Joe Buck and Troy Aikman could talk about was how much he worked in the offseason on his pass catching, because that's what it was going to take for him to get more reps. Literally every single time that he touched the ball, it was really, really frustrating. But if you're the Jets, man, like, this was supposed to be the moment. I know that the final score was, what was it, 32-19. Looks way better than it was. That last touchdown, Tyrod Taylor took them on the 2 minute and scored a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers had flashes of looking good, but also he hasn't played. He basically hadn't played in like 507 days, I think. Yes, he started that first game of the season on
4
Monday last
snaps.
year, but he only played 4 snaps. It's negligible.
Yeah.
He had flashes. He threw his 18th career touchdown on a free play, which is the most by anybody in NFL history. And it was a great looking pass to Alan Lazard right up the seam. The one like drive that they had that scored a touchdown looked really good. He and Garrett Wilson have great chemistry, but also he looked really rusty in some places. The interception that, yes, was a great play by a defensive back, tipping it and then caught by one of the linebackers. It still was like, Aaron, why are you throwing the ball there? They had a chance. They're moving down the field. they have a 4th and 1 in the third quarter, and it's like, now is the time that we gotta convert, and we gotta be going for these 4th downs so we can get down the field and score a touchdown. Garrett Wilson had the edge on the inside. He ran a little slant, and Rodgers put the ball behind him. Wilson had to stop and like literally slid to fall backwards to try and catch this ball, and it got batted away. And it was just like, that's not an Aaron Rodgers pass. So, losers of this week are the New York teams for me. The Giants looking just absolutely awful. The Jets having all of this hype around them and just not living up to it. I do think that the Jets are still like a 9-win team. But, in their first test of like, all right, is this a good team or is this a great team? Is this a Super Bowl contender? Like a lot of people were saying, they failed. It wasn't like, that was close, but they really showed like, no, they failed. So that's why one of my losers for this week are the teams that play in MetLife Stadium.
And they're not even true New York teams. If the only New York teams are the Bills.
Yeah, they play in East Rutherford,
New Jersey teams. Yep,
yeah.
The New Jersey football teams, of course. Oh my goodness, I want to harken back to the Steelers game for the loser, but really what comes to mind for me as a loser, and I have massive respect for this team. Man, the Rams team health I consider to be a big loss. Their offensive line took a bunch of hits during the game against the Lions. And on top of that, Puka Nacua being hurt and going on IR, going to be out 4 games. Man, after a couple of years now of Cooper Kupp being injury prone and now Puka being injury prone, it's like, wow. And Cooper Kupp showed out. He did a great job in the game against the Lions. He did an incredible job.
Cooper Kupp.
Exactly. He looked like he turned back the clock and really did an amazing job. But man, with an offensive line that's in shambles and with a receiving core that's going to be Cooper Kupp and Demarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell is going to be tricky for them. But man, the Rams, I think Matt Stafford did an amazing job for the Rams and really put on a cape. The throw that he made across his body, fading backwards on an out route,
disgusting.
Just gross. Just an insane throw. Where it was a no look, it was pressure in his face getting hit. There was no reason he should have the ability to do that. It just felt like instinct for him. Just an amazing job by Stafford. And he gets rewarded with injuries across his whole damn offense. And so although he's not a loser, man, the Rams' injury luck I consider to be a huge loss for them.
Yeah. I mean, you look at this Rams team, their schedule the next few weeks. And let's say that Nacua is only out 4 weeks, which I think from what I've heard, it's going to be like 6 to 8. But let's say he's only out 4. They have Arizona next, who honestly, I think that Arizona might win that game. It's at Arizona, and Arizona looked pretty good against Buffalo.
Yeah.
Then San Francisco, Chicago, Green Bay. That's their next 4 games. That's not an easy stretch. I mean, with the blows that they took, you could legitimately see this Rams squad at 0-5 after the next 4 weeks. Just like looking at those games, it's they aren't playing their cupcakes that they have later in the season, at that time. So yeah, definitely tough blow for the Rams. My last loser I have as the Green Bay Packers. And this one has to do with the fact that they were the only NFC North team to lose this week. And so a team that was vying for a division title, that's going to be tough, but also losing Jordan Love. Luckily, it's not a season-ending injury. He's out 3 to 6 weeks, which is a pretty wide range. They're not putting him on IR because, there's a chance that he doesn't need to be out all 4 weeks. But I mean, a knee injury, a ligament knee issue, that's something that he could come back, and it just takes him getting sacked one time for that to get re-aggravated and him be done for the season. So definitely a tough blow for the Packers. Definitely a tough blow losing that game. A game where, yes, Saquon Barkley played great, but Jalen Hurts was iffy. You know, he had a couple turnovers that has sort of been were sort of the downfall of the Eagles last year. So definitely tough for Green Bay. Again, you know, it could be worse. Jordan Love could be done for the year, but I think even when he comes back, he's likely going to be handicapped a little bit. And so yeah, so already being a game back for Green Bay of the rest of the division, and you look at their schedule: Indianapolis, Tennessee, Minnesota are their next three games. Three games that I think, if they have Jordan Love, are definite wins. But without him, Indianapolis looked good this week. Tennessee, I think.
A crazy throw too.
Oh yeah,
The off the back foot, just ripping
60
it
yards without stepping into it was crazy. Tennessee is a team that we both think is going to be frisky and is going to win some games that you're not expecting. And Minnesota, that game is at Minnesota, I believe, and Minnesota looked good this week. You know, so like that is certainly a tough blow for Green Bay, especially because you pay Jordan Love all this money without having seen a full season of super productive Jordan Love, and already you're not going to see that again. So just really tough blow for the Packers. Why they are one of my losers for this week.
Yep, I can definitely get behind that. If you're the Packers, do you call up Ryan Tannehill or anybody else for that matter? Is there anybody else who you call up because the Malik Willis experience isn't an experience you want?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you do. I don't hate making that decision if you are Green Bay. Yeah, you need to look at, like, okay, how important are these next 3 to 6 games? How much can we rely on Josh Jacobs and our defense? And is it worth risking paying, bringing Ryan Tannehill in, paying him playing good enough that, like, okay, Jordan Love doesn't need to come back so fast, which I don't think would happen, but it does bring in a lot of controversy into a locker room with, like, yeah, this is our young quarterback that we spent a first round pick on when Aaron Rodgers needed wide receivers. And it is a quarterback that he had a stretch of 9 games where he was better than anybody else in the league, and we paid him based on that 9-game stretch, but we haven't seen a full season out of him worth paying him that much money. Their controversy just kind of starts to seep its way in there. So I do think, I don't know, I think maybe you let it ride with Malik Willis 1 week. And if it's that bad, then yeah, but we'll see. So, Nick, the one other thing that we wanted to get into, because of how excited we are about football, is the college football season. We are a few weeks in. A few teams have played 3 games at this point. Most teams have only played 2, and there's some really surprising things that have gone on. I think, Nick, we should start with the most obvious, and that is the pitiful downfall of the Florida State Seminoles. I mean, a team that started the season as a top 10 team. They started at 10. They went undefeated and won the ACC last year. The ACC, yes, a conference that a lot of people view as a joke, but it does have good schools, good teams in it. Miami is playing really well this year. Clemson got obliterated by Georgia, but then obliterated Appalachian State. So, like, what's that mean? Boston College is a top 25 team right now. NC State was looking promising and then got destroyed by Tennessee. So just a really peculiar conference. Definitely one team has to make it because of the new college football playoff rules. And Florida State seemed like it was theirs to lose, and boy, have they lost it. They went to Dublin, Ireland, and lost to Georgia Tech. Then they went home and lost at home to Boston College. Nick, what do you make of this? What do you make of this squad?
The thing that you and I were talking about last week, which the meme is absolutely hysterical. You and I were both cracking up by it. That the drop off to DJU from, man, I'm blanking on the quarterback.
Jordan Travis.
for Jordan Travis last year is the biggest drop off since Trevor Lawrence to Jordan Travis. And it might be true. It might be true. Jordan Travis has been missing the broadside of Barnes, man. That
DJU, not Jordan
DJU.
Travis.
DJU. You're right. Not Jordan Travis. DJU missed the broadside of the barn with that throw last week in the end zone, just missing on the fade route. Man, DJU has really, on his third school now, I believe, just really been struggling. And Florida State, we knew that there was going to be a drop-off with all the NFL talent that was leaving last year, with the 2 defensive linemen as well as the receivers leaving last year. But, man, the drop-off seems to have been really steep, where the quality of play just is not where it was before.
Yeah.
You have any particular notes about the losses particularly? Boston College, I don't know that we view that high. They had a blowout this last week. They blew out the team they were playing against. But man, it feels more like Florida State has just kind of fallen apart. And so be it.
Yeah, I mean, so Georgia Tech beats them in Ireland. It's like, oh my gosh, Georgia Tech is such a good school. Then they go and they play Georgia State, I think, and they beat them, but it wasn't great. They get into the top 25, and then they fly up to Central New York and play Syracuse, and Syracuse beats them, beat them handedly. I mean, granted, the score was closer than it was at the end, than the game truly was, but a Georgia Tech team that ran for 200 yards against Florida State, Syracuse held them to 112 yards of rushing in the game, right? So, what does that actually say about Florida State? I think it says that Florida State, or what does that actually say about Georgia Tech? I don't think it says much. I think it says that Florida State really is not that good of a team. And so the fall off there is significant. It definitely opens the door for Miami with Cam Ward to take over the conference and try and get one of those first round bye bids into the college football playoff. But that being said, I did see a lot from Boston College in that game that would lead you to believe that they might be a legitimate team. And the same thing goes for Virginia Tech, who lost to Vanderbilt in the first week, but wasn't a conference loss. And they look like they're going to be a decent squad. I think they have the most, I think they returned 85% of their starters, which was top 5 in the nation or something like that, something just crazy, so they've got a lot going for them. Syracuse, has a lot going for them right now. They're 2-0. Kyle McCord is looking like one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He leads the country in touchdown passes, and he is 3rd in the country in passing yards. And one of the guys ahead of him has played 3 games, not 2. So he's looking like exactly what he said he was. So Florida State has fallen off. They might not even end the season in the top 25. Something really, really interesting is that in the last 32 years, all but one of those years, a top 10 preseason ranked by the AP top 10 team has ended the year outside of the top 25. The only year that happened was a few years ago. I think it was 2018. Texas went 7-5. But then they, for whatever reason, they were playing Georgia in the Sugar Bowl and beat them and ended the season right at 25. And that was the one year that it happened. So Florida State started the year at 10. They might be that team that they might go 6-6. Really, really interesting. Another thing that I feel like we have to talk about is Notre Dame and their loss to Northern Illinois this week, sort of vaulting Northern Illinois into the leading candidate for the group of 5 school to make the college football playoff. Assuming they win the MAC. It was weird. I don't know how much of it you saw or how much film you saw of it after, but this team that went into College Station, into Kyle Field, and beat Texas A&M looked like they couldn't compete in the MAC this last week. Their defense played well, but Riley Leonard looked a lot like DJU. He was just not completing passes. He was throwing really, really bad interceptions. And, all of the memes are going around, but it's basically true because Notre Dame isn't in a conference, basically saying Notre Dame has been eliminated from the college football playoff already with that one loss. But seriously, man, Nick, what is going on with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish?
Riley Leonard, I just feel like every time I see a positive play, it seems like it's a power run. It seems like it's Notre Dame's offensive line, which is obviously well coached and has been for years, and they obviously recruit really well on the O-line. It seems like Riley Leonard does a really good job with his legs to be able to move the ball down the field, to be able to just get chunks to be able to move down the field. But man, his passing is spotty. It feels like I don't know if you want to attribute it to his accuracy or decision making, but his passes just seem to be all over the place. And really, when you can't produce consistent offense from the drop back perspective or play action perspective, it just feels like the offense kind of stagnates and you really have to rely on a more gimmicky style of offense. And that kind of seems like what Notre Dame's kind of falling into a little bit. And so I don't really, it feels like that's where Riley Leonard's at. But there were also obviously issues with the multiple kick blocks against Notre Dame. It just felt like special teams, as well as the one breakaway catch and run that Brown had, the running back for NIU, that play just kind of bust open. When you get a long touchdown like that, 7 points goes a long way in a slugfest like that game was. And so there just seemed to be a couple of little bit of turning points. But Riley Leonard really, I don't think, changed the game for positive for Notre Dame this week.
Yeah, definitely not. And it also then makes you start to think about Texas A&M, who lost to this team week 1. And, at the time it was like, oh, man, that was a tough loss if you're A&M. But, it was a quality loss, right? You lost to Notre Dame. Notre Dame then vaults up to number 5 in the country. Hey, that's a loss that is, in college football, it's not as talked about as much as in college basketball, but a quality loss can go a long way with your resume. But I mean, now Notre Dame then losing to Northern Illinois the very next week does not look good. Does not look good for the Aggies. Nick, there are a couple of Big Ten teams that I feel like we have to talk about. One because they lost, and the other because, man, they've done everything but loss, it feels like. And the first, the former of those, is the Michigan Wolverines, who I think a lot of people, myself included, had them losing to Texas this week just because of how cohesive the Texas squad is compared to the Michigan squad, losing their head coach, their quarterback, their running back, some receivers, a lot of guys on defense. But I did not expect Quinn Ewers in Texas to go to Ann Arbor, go to the Big House, and just blow them out of the water. This Michigan squad really needs to find themselves quick, because though they have a really, really easy non-conference schedule, the Big Ten Conference is a gauntlet this year. What are sort of your thoughts having seen that?
Man, there are just kind of some parallels between these two teams where the last couple of years it feels like Texas has finally been able to put together some really quality line play on both sides of the ball between their defensive line, which has been quality the last few years, and Michigan, which obviously has been a really quality line play from the defensive and offensive perspective the last few years, especially with Jim Harbaugh. But man, J.J. McCarthy, who in my opinion seemed a little bit overrated the last few years, the loss of him to be able to manage the game for Michigan, it feels like the drop-off in quarterback play was noticeable. And both of these teams lost at least their top receiver this last year to the draft. Texas lost 2 receivers. Yet Texas was able to still produce offense and was still able to, with Ewers, although Ewers is obviously he's an upperclassman, to put it lightly. But man, to have that veteran quarterback presence that Michigan just lacked, even when you don't have the stud outside receiving weapons on both sides between Michigan and Texas, it feels like Texas just has something that Michigan doesn't, although both of them seem to have taken a step back potentially from where they were a year ago.
Yeah. The other thing I mentioned with Texas is they lost both, like basically have lost 3 running backs because they lost
Brooks last year was
Brooks.
good and injured.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was injured and then drafted. Who was the guy that was supposed to be their number 1 tailback this year got hurt, season-ending injury in preseason or in fall camp, and so they're on their like 3rd running back compared to what they had last year, and still they were just able to manhandle this Michigan Wolverines team, which is something that even during Harbaugh's not great years at Michigan, that was never something we were saying about the team, was that they were getting manhandled. But this squad, I mean, like, I think it's early, obviously, and I don't think Ohio State has really played anybody. But like, I can't imagine Michigan winning the game for a 4th year in a row based on what we've seen so far. Because even in their first game of the season against Fresno State, it was like the score was like 10-6 at halftime. Like, it was like, what is going on with this team? So that's something to keep an eye on. And that other Big Ten team is the Oregon Ducks, which is weird to call them a Big Ten team, but they are in fact a Big Ten team, and they have had a very interesting start to their year. So their first game of the season, they play FCS Idaho, which granted, Idaho used to be an FBS team. They used to play in the Mountain West, but not for a while. The Idaho Vandals, and they beat them 24-14. This was supposed to be the cupcake of all cupcakes to open the season for them, and they beat them by 10 points at home. And then they played Boise State, which Boise State is a team that a lot of people are thinking could be the group of 5 team that makes the college football playoff this year. They have a great running back that I think is a top Heisman contender right now based on his numbers. He's just been a freak. But still, it's Boise State and you're Oregon, and you started the year in the top 5. Went into that game in the top 10 and started the year with a couple people voting you as the best team in the country. And you only win that game 37-34. And we're kind of like, it was kind of back and forth. The score was as accurate as how close that game was. Nick, what is going on with the Ducks?
What I think's kind of crazy is that the Ducks had this close of a game when their quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, who Bo Nix, depending on who you asked last year, there were people who thought that he was underrated. There were people who thought that he was overrated. But Dylan Gabriel went 18 for 21 for 243 yards, no interceptions. And really, like, they weren't able to move the ball, move the offense like they were a year ago. And that's just kind of insane because the receivers and running back situation isn't much worse than last year, yet the offense somehow wasn't able to lay it on against Boise State. And Boise, they obviously scored 37, but to be able to produce consistently efficient offense like that and still have it be that close is ridiculous without offensive turnovers like that. But man.
Yeah, Oregon, that is concerning. I want to pull up their schedule real quick because I know they play Ohio State this year. I just forget when. So next week they play Oregon State, then they play UCLA, then Michigan State, then Ohio State. So, another non-conference game, but against an in-state rival in Oregon State, who's probably going to be pretty ticked off that they that Oregon just left them in the wayside to go to the Big Ten. But then UCLA, which is a conference opponent, Michigan State, which is a conference opponent, and then Ohio State. Man, things are going to ramp up for them and ramp up for them fast. And so I think we definitely need to keep an eye on the Oregon Ducks as to how things go for them. Nick, one last thing that I feel like we should talk about, and I think it's something that it'll be fun to sort of keep our eye on moving through this season. Back in July, I think it was, when we were just like begging for football, we did what we called a pop drop lock of teams for college football. Our pop team being a team that we thought was going to vault up this year potentially into college football playoff conversation. A drop, a team that was right up there or in the playoff that we expect to really fall off, and a lock, a team that was up there and we think is still going to be up there. And so far, Nick, I'm really liking our picks. I remember that you had your pop is Arizona, who has looked really good so far. They're up into the top 25. My pop was Syracuse, who is 2-0 with under Coach Fran Brown with a win against a top 25 opponent, and Kyle McCord looks unstoppable right now. I know that my drop was Florida State, which is already paying off really well.
Dividends, man, dividends.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure my lock though was Oregon, so it'll be interesting to see how that sort of pans out. I don't know. I need to go back and look to see exactly what ours were.
I believe my lock was Ohio State, and Ohio State hasn't stumbled yet, but they haven't been tested quite yet in that kind of way. So we'll have to wait till later in the season to see. But man, some of these picks we'll be able to really keep track, and man, it'll be really fun to see how this season progresses, because we think we know what's going on now, but we don't even know what's going to be going on in December.
Right. Yeah. So it'll be fun. It'll be fun to check in on that every once in a while. And the thing that's cool is, with the expansion to 12 teams, if you're like a top 18 team, like you're in the conversation, like if you're 18, you just barely missed it by like 5 spots, which is really, really interesting. New wrinkle to the college football playoff that we have now. So it'll be fun to keep an eye on that. But Nick, man, as always, it's great talking with you, especially great talking football when football's actually happening, not just theoretical, like, oh, the football season's going to happen, we should talk about football. But, like, no, it is here. We are in it. And, man, I'm so excited about it.
Yes, sir. Stoked to be back with you, Jack, for the football season.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for watching, for tuning in, and for taking your time to share with us. Have a great rest of your week, and hey, enjoy watching those games this week, because next thing you know, it's going to be February and it's all going to be over again and we're going to be crying. So enjoy the season, enjoy this week 2 of the NFL, week 3 of college, and we'll talk to you next time.
Peace.